Moonlit dreams soaring high, women in space. Reach for the sky, they break through bounds, leave no trace. With courage they embrace space engagement. Constellations whisper and shine as they voyage through space and time, exploring mysteries.
Okay, I'll give a quick intro and then I'm going to hand it over to you all. Hi everyone. I'm Lynn Shasine. This is our, I was going to say August, but it's not, July all members meeting. So welcome everyone. I'll just take 2 minutes for some new folks or folks just joining the panel and president. As many know, Justina was our president last year. I don't see her on, but hopefully she'll join. Kudos to Justina for bringing a lot of structure to WISE. So governance, cadence, documentation, and having like a very, very practical mindset. I think the biggest thing I took away from the last year is we have a mega strong foundation to build on, and I'm really excited for what that means for us moving forward. Quickly, my path for those of you who I haven't worked with or are not part of the leads, I went from STEM working group member to co-chairing STEM with Audrey. Last year was VP, and now I have the super fun responsibility to carry the torch forward, being this year's president with Krista as my VP. I'm taking the Krista mantra into 2026 and 27 is volunteers doesn't mean we're not here to do great things. And so let's do great things this year. Let's have all-star programming. Let's increase membership. Let's be really thoughtful about how we use this time. And I'm super excited for that. So I think about this year's about raising the bar. We have a solid foundation thanks to people like Jennifer. We have governance. We have all of this great stuff in place. So now let's go push forward and increase our membership because we have that foundation and we're going to have the ability to execute with a lot of impact and a lot of ambition. So I'm super excited about that. My plan for this is to lead by listening. So Krista and I have time over the next 2 weeks to spend with all of the working groups to better understand their goals, their pain points, and really roll that into a master view, capitalizing on what marketing's already done with a really in-depth marketing view. So we'll be able to show all of our members and people who join what the year ahead will look like. And so they can really think about how they engage with content and have a lot more visibility into the content that's coming at near and long term. And then really using WISE as a development tool, whatever that means. I think about it as making women better, people better, better leaders, and bringing more into the space ecosystem that we bring to the table. And so let's have a mission that really excites all of us to do more and better things and bring a lot more people into our community. And I think about this panel as being that perfect segue. So I'll turn it over to Katina because we have a great panel today. And I want to do more of that and share these conversations with a more diverse set of people moving forward. And today is a really good example of that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Katina to walk us through today's content.
Thanks, Lynn. So for anyone new joining us today, SSPI-WISE is the global community for women in space and satellite and the allies who support them. So we're built around the crux of STEM outreach, mentorship, and connecting, as Lynn said, meaningfully connecting women across the industry. So today we're talking about the defense of space as space becomes increasingly critical to our global infrastructure on how we do things across civil, commercial, and defense. It means we need to ensure that we're building resiliency at every layer. It's not just about watching for adversaries. It also means managing space traffic and congestion, securing new tech like quantum, ensuring cybersecurity is at the heart of what we're doing and built into the DNA at each company in the space domain, as well as getting government and commercial partners rowing in the same direction. So let's find out more about those, where they overlap and where maybe they don't overlap today, and discover some opportunities there. So I'd like to introduce each of our three panelists. We have Amber from ChameleCo, Dr. Darren McKnight from LeoLabs, and Jennifer Jeffries, who leads the CIC program. So if each of you could give us 90 seconds to 2 minutes on maybe your path into this work and also what defense of space means from where you're sitting today, that would be most helpful. Let's start with Jennifer, Darren, and then Amber to keep us moving.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you to SSPI and WISE for bringing us together to discuss such a critical topic on the defense of space and building resiliency at every layer. For me, the defense of space isn't just a theoretical concept. It's the common thread that's kind of bridged my two careers together. I spent 20 years in the US Air Force as a space and missile operations officer. And during that time, I saw early the vital power of commercial military integration. I served as the deployment commander for the Eagle Vision program, and by operating US Air Force ground stations that would downlink intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance imagery directly from commercial electro-optical and commercial synthetic aperture radar satellites, I first learned firsthand that military operations and commercial space capabilities are inextricably linked. Today, I serve as a consultant for the U.S. Space Force Commercial Integration Cell. I actually fall under Space Force's space for those who barely understand the hierarchy of the new Space Force. But I sit out at Vandenberg Space Force Base on the combined space ops floor with our allied and joint partners. From where I sit, the defense of space means recognizing that our vulnerabilities and strengths extend end to end. We tend to focus heavily on that like shiny object in space, the satellite in orbit, but the true defense encompasses the entire communications path, which includes not only the ground infrastructure and the data links, but the personnel. And most importantly, defending space requires actionable trust. It involves sharing indications and warnings of threats with our trusted commercial mission partners left of bang. By providing this critical awareness before an incident occurs, we empower our partners to proactively mitigate threats and engage in a true kind of collective self-defense. So I look forward to discussing how we can strengthen this end-to-end resiliency together. Thank you.
So I guess I'm next. Jennifer, thank you for that introduction. I'm Darren McKnight here. I'm the Senior Technical Fellow at LeoLabs. I'm going to apologize in advance. I was told that my building was going to have a fire alarm, and so I moved to a coffee shop, and so I've traded fire alarms for the Dulles landing path here. So my job at LeoLabs is really making complex problems seem simple. From my very early days of being a physics professor at the Air Force Academy, all the way to sort of being the rocket scientist to pull the interesting information from the radar data that we capture from our radars around the world. My job is really to prevent strategic surprise in space. Actually, Jennifer and I have opportunities to work together on trying to make sure that we know what space objects are doing, what the capabilities are, what they might do in the future. We don't go quite so far as intent. That takes a little bit more diplomatic side to understand the absolute intent, but we can infer what things are up to. So it's very exciting for me to talk about the issue of resiliency with y'all. And I think that the thing I really like to put across is as we deal with these complex situations is always great. People talk about AI all the time, artificial intelligence. We got to use artificial intelligence, and we use it a ton, but we also use RI. Jennifer, you ever heard of RI before?
No, actually.
Yeah, it's real intelligence. So we like to we like to apply like the rocket equation and conservational momentum internally with some of the radar observations that we make. So the bottom line here is that if we want to understand what's going on in spatial resiliency, we have to start from the basics of physics and work our way up. So I'll talk to you a little bit about how we do that and how it supports this this thematic session today. So thank you for the opportunity to contribute.
I don't know how I'm going to follow up with those two because that's some pretty cool careers, but I will try. So I am not in the midst of Dulles Airport. I wish I was because I'd be flying somewhere. But thank you all for having me with SSPI-WISE. I'm Ambericent Cornett. I go by Amber. Katina mentioned that earlier. I'm the founder and CEO for ChameleCo, and I'm also an active Master Sergeant with the U.S. Army, National Guard, U.S. Army Reserve. I've been in it for a little over 23 years. And I've been able to balance like careers that have spanned it over engineering and space medicine at NASA, the intelligence community, in the NCR, and everywhere else. The Pentagon Joint Staff, the CDC, and a little bit of sprinkles of private sector here and there. And these roles have basically always focused on like solving complex mission challenges, mission essential like concepts throughout cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and quantum, intel and information operations. I can get into that a little bit later on. And then resilience system design. So for me, defending space is a lot more than just satellites and all the space debris and things like that. It's about protecting the interconnected systems that modern society depends on a daily basis. Your GPS, your systems and like wind tunneling, all these other things that we survive on, right? As space becomes more integrated in our economy and national security, resilience is going to depend heavily upon how we are able to combine the technologies and the trusted partnerships and the human expertise to stay ahead of evolving challenges and be ahead of the rest of the world because we want to stay, the first and official nation for all these things great, right? So it's my pleasure to be on the panel, and I hope that I can give you some of my breadth and depth for the concepts we're talking about today.
Great. Thank you all. So my name's Katina. As we said earlier, I'm the Associate Director of Strategy over at Aureus Space. Aureus Space's goal is to enable the warfighter as well as commercial space industry with top of the line SATCOM and space-based solutions. So diving in, let's see, first question for Darren. You recently released that report on space debris, updating it through, I believe, 2025 or early 26. Now, LeoLabs' data shows LEO getting more crowded every year. How much of defending space today do you feel is really traffic and debris management versus possibly deterring an adversary? And what are some things from that report that you can maybe use to highlight or underscore those things?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that question. So first off, I want to make it very simple. Information is deterrence. And when it comes to space, this isn't like what's going on in maritime and everybody can look and see when ships are stacking up outside a port. It's hard to tell what's going on in space without that persistent intelligence. So we see objects in space about 10 times a day. that may seem like a silly question, to a silly metric, but if you don't see things often, you can't see how quickly things are changing. If you don't see things often, you can't really characterize and understand what things are. So we measure things like size of space objects, effective density. Density matters. Whether or not that's really compact, that maybe look like something like a weapons system, or it's very low density, like a global connectivity satellite with a big solar array that's doing commercial work. So we can actually tell those. We can tell if it's tumbling or not. If it's tumbling, probably not doing its job. So all of those things come together that really help us power looking at threat identification, threat characterization, threat prioritization. And this doesn't only support space security, it also supports space safety. Because the more often you can see things, the better you can understand about how close things are getting. So what I think really important about this persistent orbital intelligence is the world, as Amber just mentioned, it's really commercial, security, and safety all are intermingling at this point. And it's really important to take a holistic look at space object characterization to understand resiliency. The thing that might affect some of our national security assets may not be adversary satellites. It may be orbital debris, depending on which altitude you're at and depending on what regulations are being put in place. So I think it's a very interesting, complex web. But those three domains, I think, are very important to pull together. And we try really hard to do that by providing this persistent orbital intelligence to support those three domains. Oh.
Yeah, that was well said. And I'll leave a little space for Jennifer, Amber, if you guys wanted to add anything to that.
I'm not gonna lie, he actually answered it pretty pretty legitimately. I mean, we look at tech and like infrastructure and things like that with space and space policy as one of those concepts where like it's all about protection, but there's also a big push in offense too. Like offense and defense kind of play a big role in the way that we deal with all the things that are orbiting the Earth right now and other possible planetary alignments too. So I think he said, the breadth of it. I just don't want to have dead air.
Yeah. And Amber, for our maybe more commercial or civil oriented folks in the audience, how might you define space offense versus defense, or how have you seen that characterized in your experience?
So space offense is kind of like at rest. It's one of those things where you're just kind of optimizing your experiences from the past when you had to do a defensive posture. Defensive posture is where you have to, build a concept against a territory that's trying to invade your own prominent space, right? And in that offense, you kind of realign your tactics, your way of motion, your way of thinking, your strategy, to make sure that next time you don't get hit in the same scenario and you improve on those scenarios that you could think into a frame of mind where you're like, okay, how could somebody manipulate or infiltrate something that's in space? How can someone potentially grab a hold of something like the Hubble telescope and use it for some type of optimizing a negligent entourage in like Russia or China or something like that, something to that effect. But when you're doing a defensive posture, it's kind of like, okay, you're defending against your position. You're basically holding on to your attributes while at the same time pushing off an adversary or pushing off somebody that wants to take control of your assets. So that's the difference between like offense and defense. If you're a football watcher or you do any kind of like basketball or any sports, anything like that, is the same terminology, same kind of detail. You're optimizing your performance in the event that you're attacked. And then if you're attacked, you're trying to prevail and make sure that your attack is not as destructive as you have, the stake in the collateral damage. Hopefully that clears it up.
Yeah, thank you. That was really comprehensive. And Amber, where might you see cybersecurity or quantum computing kind of coming in and intersecting either of these offensive or defensive strategies and positions?
So quantum computing is just, to me, the way that I think of quantum computing is a way to maximize and increase integrity and create absolutes for calculations with the regular computers, the regular ones and zeros that we see. And so adding quantum computing actually builds in almost a finite ecosystem where we can strategize in a huge compound unilaterally, same concepts, looking at different degrees of a way to get to an end goal. And then maximize that component, pick the 100% instead of the 99%, offering, and actually do that in pursuit of the protection or the defense or the offensive structure for whatever the concept will be. Maybe it's, protecting against a cybersecurity model from, embedding themselves into our computer and watching us while we're watching it. Or maybe it may be a design where we're using quantum computing to protect the infrastructure for, let's just throw out there, NASA's mission control systems, right? We don't want anybody to get a hold of those types of infrastructures because now they have control over a big, big system that's a scary thought. Me being in the world of cybersecurity, I see things like this all the time, man in the middle attacks and, these little evil twins where you go to a coffee shop, Darren, and you use their Wi-Fi and you see, oh, Starbucks, and then you see Starbucks, but the capitalization is different. So you pick either one. But now that person has, infiltrated your system because they're offering you a Wi-Fi structure, but you're using the Wi-Fi that's not really Starbucks Wi-Fi. So we try to do a lot of magnifying in the concept of using quantum computing to make sure we get the on the money detail as far as choosing the option that would be best for us to strategize and hone in on our capabilities and use them to make sure we ward off any threats to the system, national security, NASA, whatever the case may be.
Awesome. And I think I saw Jennifer nodding a lot. Would you like to add anything from your perspective?
Well, both Darren and Amber have brought up some points that I think are germane to kind of my perspective. Even just starting with Darren's comment on RI, and I was like, I don't know what RI is, real intel. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the from where I sit, some of the challenges with the lexicon and acronyms and between industry and commercial. And then, our partners are very focused not only on the threats today, but also, with quantum coming on, it's with every new capability, I think there's a opportunity and there's a risk and a threat that might be associated with it and how it might be used against us.
Great. And that sort of let's say translation layer between commercial and government, not just the acronyms, but the tech, the people that are experts or upskilling to be able to work and really enhance different defense capabilities. I think I saw Krista in the chat mentioning the importance of people in this space ecosystem. And so that's where I think these roles where folks are translating this for commercial partners as well as commercial stakeholders, right, is so important because it is a collaborative environment where that collaboration, that communication is mission critical. All right. And so with that, what, Jennifer, might commercial and military integration look like day to day as far as what you can share from where you're sitting between, say, Space Force? I know very large, and there are different deltas and other things within. But what might that look like from where you sit in this highly collaborative seat, and where does it work, and where might there be room for improvement?
Thank you, Katina. That's a great question. So, day to day, my role on the military ops floor feels a lot like being a translator between the very distinct cultures. Sitting directly at the intersection of commercial and military integration, you quickly realize that while both sides are looking at the same domain, we are looking at it through sometimes completely different lenses. A great way to frame this is through the DIME model. I'm not sure how many are familiar with the diplomatic, information, military, and economic instruments of power. I mean, naturally, the government and the Space Force are highly focused on the M, or the military aspect, but our industry partners are massively influential in the diplomatic, information, and especially the economic spheres. And we bring complementary strengths to the table. But because our primary drivers are different, our locations, our lexicons and paradigms are completely different. Sometimes we find ourselves swimming in like acronyms, and sometimes the exact same word can mean two completely different things. So, one great example that's easy to talk about is the word deorbit. Like to the military, deorbiting a satellite specifically means at end of life, you're going to bring it down through the LEO, the low Earth orbit atmosphere, and kind of let it burn up in, on reentry. Our geo partners up in the geostationary belt, when they get a satellite to the end of life, they'll say they're deorbiting it, but they mean they're super syncing it up above the geo belt, to what we call a graveyard orbit. And so you can imagine, the momentary panic or confusion on an ops floor when one side says a satellite's coming all the way from geo all the way down to LEO, and our partners are meaning they're going in the exact opposite direction. But beyond the vocabulary, we also have a massive capability understanding gap. Many military satellite communication planners and operators, they still view commercial capabilities through a legacy lens. Their mental model is built around traditional, like transponded bent pipe bandwidth from a geo satellite. And they're often completely unaware of the state-of-the-art capabilities that our commercial SATCOM partners are bringing to the fight today. We now have software-defined automation on board the satellites. We drive dynamic self-healing networks. These modern commercial systems can automatically compensate for some of the threats of active jamming environments. They can also autonomously fight through and in some of the most austere conditions. But this knowledge gap is what directly feeds into the friction we experience. There is a lingering cultural hesitancy within the military to fully rely on commercial capabilities. And this stems from a belief that the commercial services are somehow inherently less reliable and secure than their purpose-built military systems. So where does the integration actually work well? I would say it works beautifully when we bridge these gaps through mutual trust and active bidirectional communication, which is what the CIC is really focused on. But when that communication breaks down, or we fail to educate our operators on what the modern commercial systems can actually do, mistrust can creep in. And when that happens, open sharing and collaboration shut down. So I spend a lot of my time trying to bridge those two.
Yeah, that is certainly a full docket, being that translator between the two different camps, but also taking it a step further and acting in that integrator seat. As we all know, integrations are tough, they're unique, and they're not for the faint of heart. Darren, jumping in on something Jennifer said. So how from where you sit, how does LeoLabs ensure that their commercial grade products and services are meeting or exceeding some of the standards and expectations that government partners might have?
Absolutely. So there's a little one-liner that I use a lot that says space would be a lot better, more resilient if people would show their work, share their work, and understand the context of the space environment. And so one of the things that we do as a commercial provider is we can show our work. We are kind of like a commercial surrogate of the 18th Space Defense Squadron space surveillance network, right? Very similar in lots of ways. That network is a government network that supports other activities, battle management. They can't show all the internal stuff when they provide conjunction data messages because that's critical to our national security. However, we as a commercial company can't. So we can show our work, we can share our work, we can tell you exactly what positional uncertainty goes along with this state vector or this conjunction, which then allows there to be complete transparency. I hate that we use the word transparency. Sounds like I'm from Washington, but complete openness about all the details, the uncertainty, the errors, the important factors. And once you do that, right, once you communicate that, show your work and share your work, and then understand how does that fit into the whole global ecosystem, I think is really important. And I think what's most important is while I have a PhD in aerospace engineering, I'm a rocket scientist, and you're going to say, oh, I'm going to give you something really technical. The thing that's holding us back the most is lack of global diplomacy in space. And I'm not saying this because of the venue that I'm speaking to right now, but my wife always reminds me, and I agree, if women ran the world, we wouldn't have a lot of the problems we have right now, right? Communicate, to cooperate, to collaborate, to meet global mutual space mission assurance. We just aren't doing it because it seems like we've kind of lost the ability for diplomacy these days. I don't understand why. My wife's thesis is because guys are in charge. I think that's partly maybe 60% right. Right. And so I think what we do is that information is deterrence. Back to my initial statement. Information is deterrence. And we have to show our work, share our work, and then explain the context of that to people. So I hope that answered your question. And yes, my wife is, yeah, she's the better three quarters. I'm just struggling along here, but absolutely. Over.
Thank you, Darren. Yeah, and I think that part of that comes back to that human element and how are we managing that, right? There are all of these different systems, these different stakeholders. To quote Jennifer, with the dime model, if we kind of put it into those lanes, those different types of interests are also underlying at play and influencing how we collaborate or how we don't. Would you guys say that lack of collaboration might be one of the vulnerabilities, I guess, one of the major vulnerabilities as we are kind of moving into the next 5 years of space architecture? Because when we talk space architecture, there is that tendency to talk, okay, these hardware things or these software things that are happening, and I think to Tamara's point in the chat, what's that human element and where is that factoring in?
I mean, I can speak to the elements of the collaboration and like talking to the vulnerabilities composite, but I can also steer you in a different thought direction. So yes, it's good for collaboration. Like I preach it in the IC all the time. We have all these intelligence community organizations, but none of them really talk. And it's possibly, and this is just my concept on it, it's possibly because of the internal details that you want to kind of keep in-house. And when I say that, I say there's proprietary knowledge that gets released when you start collaborating with other entities. And there's a little bit of a differentiation of concepts when it comes to how things are done. One organization may do it one way and the other does it a whole different way. And putting those combinations together could lead to a little bit of an influx in not really a contamination of product, but a little bit of an off focus for the progression of the two to meet to in that mission or that focus. So when you think about collaboration, there's a lot of proprietary knowledge that gets transferred in between. And if you're doing it in the situation and the legalities of space, then it becomes kind of like a MOU or an NDA that you got to put out on a national platform and an international platform. We can't by works design and trade information with another community if they are not on the same playing field, i.e. the UN, i.e. Five Eyes. For the people that don't know what a Five Eye is, it's the organizations that we work with in collaboration in the intelligence community that have the same focus and worth, that draw together and do conclusive efforts for intelligence frameworks. So if you're going to trade off information, where does that lead you in the vulnerability sense? Now I'm giving you, let's just say me and Katina, we're working together and I give her my address and she has mine. Well, now if I want to, I could just pop up at Katina's house whenever I want to. But that's not the way that we have that interaction. Our interaction is just, I just gave her my information so she trusts me. I didn't mean for her to come over every Saturday afternoon expecting me to do tea time. That's not how this works. So there's got to be a collaboration effort in between those communities, but there's also proprietary information that you have to lock down to protect yourself from a vulnerability or some type of lack of a stake in the opportunities that you're pursuing as a community effort. Correct me if I'm wrong, because this is an open discussion, I'm sure, with the panel. But Darren, Jennifer, y'all, let me know.
Yeah. I jump in here and say, yes, the people portion can be, part of our vulnerability, but also without a doubt, kind of as Amber alluded to, that I would put it in a policy bucket, specifically the policies that govern information sharing and classification. I mean, hardware and software are not our bottlenecks right now. Commercial industries innovating on those points and fronts, and with the speed of, software-defined payloads and self-healing networks. But one of our single points of failure is the legacy policy framework that governs and prevents us from sharing actionable indications and warnings with our partners, and doing this, as I've mentioned before, like left of bang. That's why it's so important that we have our partners like Darren and the other commercial providers who can share information that's not locked up in some kind of government safe that can't be shared outside of that. Because if we're going to partner together, we need to be sharing what we know, how we see the environment. It's great if we have brilliant multi-billion-dollar, commercial assets on orbit, but our policies prevent us, if our policies would prevent us from telling our satellite owner operators about targets, that they're being targeted under a cyber or an active jamming or other kind of event, we have to fix the policy to enable the speed of trust.
Yeah. And that goes based on well, we're talking about policies, right? Mauritius just joined the Artemis Accords. They're the 70th group to join. That's the civil space exploration framework that also looks at the same alignments and the same cognitive reality of that exploration mission to go to the moon, go to Mars, and that collaborative effort with all those countries, all those entities, that makes for a variation of trust that is well beyond what the intelligence operations are for the intel community. We trust certain levels of this, but when we talk about space organizations, we play in the same ballpark as everybody, but then we have a divisible line in the sand when it comes to Russia. Like, I don't know if anybody has any insight on this, but when I was working at NASA, we had all the information from all of the other entities that work with us, JAXA, ESA, CISA. They all had a collaborative effort. As an epidemiologist, I was able to use that works to compare and contrast with the astronaut office for ISS. But guess whose information I never received? Russia. And we never gave it to them. It was always a big mountain of paperwork to give them information just on the trade craft for the actual space station. And they're in the space station with us. So that boundary, like that vulnerability, man, that really plays a big part in policy and things like that. Even in the space industry, it's a lot broader when it comes to like the enablements of that policy reality.
Absolutely, that's well said. And Darren, I see you've got your hand up.
I just want to very quickly build on what Jennifer and Amber said. We often talk about an enterprise solution requires understanding people, processes, and technologies. What we don't talk about is culture. And when it's a global issue, I think the culture really has a huge impact on the policy part of it, right? Because some countries think a policy is put in place for a certain reason. Western world may think it's different. So there's kind of like three big buckets: Western, Eastern, and Mid-Eastern, and they're completely different. And so I think that as we have this global thing, we need to understand, we need to be able to walk in other people's shoes. And that's very difficult. It's very difficult to do, to be able to go, I understand that your thought process is completely different. And it's not better or worse, by the way. It's not that Western thinking is better than Eastern thinking is better than Mid-East. It's just different. We need to understand this. I really think that what they were talking about, that iron triangle of people, processes, technology, culture really fits into both the people and the processes part. And we often leave that out because it's so easy to think that we are logical, we have a good approach, and we understand that there's some cultural aperture that we have to understand. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that is an incredibly strong point to add, and a great framework as far as the people, processes, and tech, and how culture might influence that. And when we are sitting in these seats within the space industry and working to build resiliency into space architecture and systems, remembering these different paradigms and lenses to look through and evaluate is so important, because it's how collaboration is approached, right? And that translation layer is so important, and right, keeping an open mind to understand, okay, what is driving the person sitting across from me, and how might they be talking about it in a way that is different from how I'm used to talking about it. And I think back to what Jennifer was saying, all the different acronyms between commercial, government, and also just there are variations within those two large buckets. So it's a lot outside of the rocket science, right? Outside of the software development, hardware development that we are all doing, is how do we create that high trust environment and communicate effectively with our partners. So with that, another good question from the audience before we start to head into the final 15 minutes of this panel is from Tamara, where she's asking, how do we create these bridges? Are there models like the Artemis Accords that Amber was mentioning that could maybe serve as a template for information sharing and for possible policy change? I'll leave it open for you guys to respond to.
Yeah, I dropped I'm doing a twofold mission, Katina. I'm actually I'm integrating into the chat like as we talk. But I put in the chat the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. That's CISA for short. I'm making the acronyms long so you know what they are in case you're not familiar with those agencies. But they basically have a Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, the JCDC, and that collaborative looks at federal agencies and brings them together with private sector organizations to kind of do a collaborative effort to build up cyber defense and like I guess like ward and thwart against any kind of significant threats that we might not know that are out there from a public sector standpoint, right? Because we're all civilians at the end of the day. But if you're sitting in the system with CISA, you see these elements come out to play, and that's the protection method because CISA is the one that protects like the the open source internet resources. And that's one of the ones that I can think of. So I dropped it in the chat just for people to research if they'd like to.
Yeah, I would say too, for specifically to, commercial military integration, there are now commercial integration strategies at the, Space Force level, at the Space Com level. And all of these strategies are great, kind of like Darren was saying, this enterprise, they have enterprise visions as well, but the challenge is in actually operationalizing those strategies. And I think one of the common misconceptions and a challenge to implementing those is, again, from where I sit, one of the biggest misconceptions is I run into this, that the commercial space is just the backup plan or plan B for when military systems fail. And this is a true misconception. We know, the military capabilities are great. But a lot of them, those purpose-built government-owned systems are in a legacy mindset. And again, to Darren's point, we need to change the culture. Today, commercial industry is often driving the bleeding edge of innovation. And the sooner we fully embrace the mind shift, the culture shift, the more resilient our entire space architecture will be. We have to, to achieve true multi-layered resilience, we have to move past these legacy assumptions, educate our planners, and realize that, commercial integration isn't just a backup plan. It's a high-tech foundational layer of our national defense.
So building on my co-panelist, I was going to say track two diplomacy. So I don't know if you've heard that term before, but oftentimes government policies, regulations, and laws are best drafted with industry participation globally, coming up with something that the operators, the engineers can live with. Then they can hand it to the State Department guys. I've done this a lot, working as a contractor, working with our State Department, and then even actually representing the United States with the State Department at the UN to say, here are things that we've done. So government, it's not that hard. We've already got buy-in from multiple countries. So it's a little bit easier hurdle to get over. Let me talk about a very specific issue on that. Recently, AIAA put out a best practices document that SpaceX, Iridium, Amazon, representing Amazon Leo, and OneWeb said these are best practices for space safety. They laid out how those four constellation operators that account for about 85 to 90% of all the total satellites in low Earth orbit in constellations right now, how they could work together to be safer. Everything they suggested is well beyond any current regulation and guideline, but they're showing how it's easy to implement. So I think that track to diplomacy is alive. It happened in the 1990s when the 25-year rule was put together and accepted by the UN in 2004. It came together because in the 1990s, we worked with each other going, hey, should it be 10 years, 15 years, 30 years? What, 25 years sounds good. And that got implemented as a guideline, an international guideline. So I think that the track two diplomacy is something we should put. Jennifer said that in a very specific way. I just gave it a title, right? But I think that track two diplomacy is how it's going to continue to work, because government people, the State Department will believe, say in the U.S., believe U.S. scientists, just like Chinese government people will believe the Chinese scientists first. If we can work together, scientists, then we can make that implementable at a policy level, is my thought. Over.
Amber, is there anything that you might want to add before we jump into the last 10 minutes?
Oh, not on that, but I am putting in here some concepts that I just thought about because Darren and Jennifer gave me a little bit of a concept idea. But basically, I was going to let you guys know that maybe we should do for SSPI-WISE, maybe there's a thought of a concept for a think tank that maybe could come out of this conversation, only because of like the trust, security, resilience, and other responsible innovation theories that we have from this conversation alone. I think that would be something that would be of interest, especially since we have so many well-rounded resources on this call alone, that I think it would be good to put us into the space ecosystem that way. So I'm going to hit send on this. So you know that I am promoting and supporting this. But yeah, I was mentioning that to the curator on the chat, Tamara. So
Thank you so much.
get with me, please, Tamara. We could talk, girl.
Nice. I love that. And we absolutely should. I think this is definitely the right forum and the right mix of people to make something like that happen. So before we close out, one sentence each, what might be the one thing that you want this room to remember from our conversation today?
Okay, well, in one sentence, I guess I would say sum up that, defense of space is a team sport, and we have to partner to win across, commercial, industry, academia, as Amber was stating. And if I can elaborate on my one sentence real quickly, I would say that, commercial integration between government and our industry partners, it can't be treated like a garnish, not something you just, sprinkle on top. We cannot build a military unique architecture and then try to sprinkle commercial capability as an afterthought when the budget gets tight or there's a crisis. To build resilient space architecture that can survive and win in a contested environment, we need to bring our commercial partners to the fold at the very beginning. And that's something I think both Amber and Darren have kind of touched on. During early planning, system design, daily operations, I guess this is the track to diplomacy that Darren was mentioning. We have to build trusted communication paths now because our adversaries aren't waiting and they won't respect the seams between our military and commercial systems. It's time we break down those legacy cultural barriers, learn each other's language, and build a unified, resilient front. So thank you again for hosting this panel today.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer.
So thank you, Darren. So I'd leave the audience with this. Space is no longer a separate domain. And based on that, just thinking in a all-inclusive concept, right? It's part of a critical infrastructure that underpins like modern society. When we think about modern society, we think about space flight and what will be in the near future. In 2100, 2130 will be, just like George Jefferson or George Jetson, where he's on his like little, vehicles and things like that, having like the robots in the homes and helping us with things and having the little transfers inside the homes. But all that needs defense, and defending space is basically meaning that we have to defend systems, partnerships, technologies, and the very people that enable every mission that we have from here on out on Earth or any other planetary object. So.
Thank you, Amber. Darren?
All right. So simple one-liner. The hard stuff is easy. The easy stuff is hard. So what do I mean by that? The hard stuff, we collect 90 billion radar observations around the world and fuse it with open source information to tell people important things about space. That's really hard. Make it look easy. I'm in awe of it every day. I'm not an RF engineer or radar frequency, so I'm just in awe of this black magic that allows us to come up with these insights. Right. So I developed these insights, and continue to mention about the document that I shared recently about the fact that the accumulation of Chinese rocket bodies above 650 kilometers, which means they will linger for 25, 50, 200 years, is at such a pace that it may surpass what it took the Soviet Union and Russia to do in 40 years for them to do it in 8 years. Believe it or not. So guess what? So that's hard for me to come up with that conclusion. In Sydney, Australia in October at the International Astronautical Congress, I presented a paper. Right after me, a Chinese individual, lady, presented about the 25-year rule being used by the Chinese. And she said, we comply with the 25-year rule. And I raised my hand politely and said, that's not what our data says. And it was a paper that was written by authors from 8 different countries that I led. Right? Included Russia, included UK, included Japan. I said, that's not what this says. And she goes, we comply with the 25-year rule. got done with the talk. After the talk, I went to her and said, ma'am, do you realize you didn't answer my question? She goes, yes. That's not that hard, right? To just admit and to be open and to say, we're not there yet. And this is why, and we need help. And so you would think that would be easy. It appears to be hard. The hard stuff, we got knocked out. Technology, we got it nailed. But what appears to be easy is really, really hard. Thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts, and with a room of very smart people, because I know my wife would tell me I'm the thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, Darren, Jennifer, Amber, thank you guys so much. This was an incredible conversation, and your insights were next level. Amber, we might be holding you to that suggestion that you made here today. Looking forward to seeing where this group and the rest of SSPI can take that. So with that, everyone, thank you for joining. Keep an eye out for our next all members meeting. If you were signed up for this meeting today, then that should already be on your calendar. If you're interested in mentorship or connecting further and becoming a member, reach out to Tamara. Her email should be, I think, connected somehow to maybe the invite or our website. And the session was recorded. It's going to be available later on our SSPI-WISE page. And with that, I would like to kick this over to Tamara for our last closing remarks.